and talk quickly through our agenda. Just begin with an introduction, talk a little bit about CClear. I think everyone attending should be fairly familiar with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, but we've been doing a lot of outreach, getting some new folks on the group. So we'll just quickly cover how our organization can help you. Next, because a brownfield inventory is early on in the process, we want to talk about brownfields 101, what they are, what they aren't, how to understand and really picture how this issue is relevant to your area and sort of what makes brownfields unique. We're going to talk about getting started, the value statement. And with that, when you begin the brownfield inventory, knowing your purpose, knowing what your community has in mind. We're going to talk about some of the information you would gather as part of a brownfield inventory, again, helping you picture what exactly it is in terms of, could either be an Excel spreadsheet, it could be an online tool, it could be something within GIS that we're going to share. So there's lots of different levels of sophistication that a brownfield inventory can meet. After that, I'm going to hand it over to Norman Wright for a case study to just get a little bit more practical, talk about some work CClear was involved in, involving GIS being Geographic Information Systems. Again, this is how an inventory can come to life. You can see it on a map and relevant to, all of the features within an area. And this can make a brownfield inventory very, useful when sharing with other outside groups like developers or, government groups. Then finally, once you have your brownfield inventory, we're going to talk about some of the next steps, the things that you can do with it, some of the different funding and grants that you can plug into once you understand what you have, as well as discuss, how you might develop property fact sheets to prioritize different properties. And then we'll end with a question and answer. In the meantime, feel free to put any questions in the chat, but we'll end with hopefully about 10 minutes. And we'll also do raise hands. So if you want to ask your question directly, feel free to just raise your hand, and then we'll call on you towards the end. I want to begin the meeting with just our learning objectives so everyone knows what they're in store with. We saw that quite a few people have never done a brownfield inventory before, so we just want to define what a brownfield is. Oftentimes people assume that brownfields have to be contaminated. That's not true. And then, we want to inspire you to do this work. So we want to, why brownfields matter. The value that brownfields present, yes, they can be liabilities, but they can also be opportunities, and why development on brownfields can make sense for your community. Then we're going to hop into the brownfield inventory methodology, how you would approach this work. Over to Norm, who's going to do a deeper dive into technology and how we can use a GIS system like ArcGIS to manage this type of work. There's a lot of information and a lot of data. So being able to effectively prioritize brownfields and some of the different stakeholders that you would engage to make this happen. Brownfields are a multidisciplinary field. And so learning how to communicate to the different parties, is how you're going to build the right team to make work happen. The Center for Creative Land Recycling. We are a national nonprofit. Our mission is the sustainable, equitable, and responsible reuse of underused properties. And really, we're here to help. We're a group of and we'll talk a little bit more about how brownfields tie into larger environmental justice issues being discussed today. Map that just demonstrates, like I said, we are a national nonprofit, but we're the brownfield technical assistance provider for EPA's Region 9 and 10. So there is some regional specialty here, but like the work that we performed in Niagara takes place in Region 2, New York. So we're not pigeonholed towards Region 9 and 10. But still, it's helpful to look at this tool and again see some of our partner organizations, and how this work is divided up within the United States, approaching brownfields. Real quick introduction. I was saying to Norm, we kind of look like a musical group, like an a cappella act. Real here. My name is Sebastian Harrison. Before joining C-Clear, I worked within the chemical industry, within their remediation department, remediating contaminated sites. And we were faced with the same issue that communities are of what do we do with these sites while protecting people, and hopefully, opening them up again so they can go back into productive use. Um, Norm, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name is Norman Wright, and I am a senior technical consultant here with C-Clear, and it's nice to be with you on this webinar today.
Awesome. Thanks, Norm. And something cool. I'm an environmental engineer. Norm is a planner coming at this from different sides. Brownfields touch so many different issues. You need people that understand the contamination, but you also need people that understand planning, and how to do things with properties. Okay, like I said, beginning with the basics, how do we define a brownfield? Property in which the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance or contaminant. So there doesn't necessarily need to be the contamination there, but the fact that you don't know and that's stopping people from doing anything with the property, means that it could be a brownfield. And really, the point that C-Clear tries to push is, a brownfield is anywhere where you can use brownfield incentives and tie into some of these great programs, to make change. And it really is a great time in terms of just the number of different federal, state, and local tools, that are able to fund these types of projects. Again, it's pretty regional specific, so we do have a guide that talks about some of the statewide resources. But please reach out to See Clear, if you'd like to learn more about some of the programs, that could impact the sites in your community. Brownfields are an environmental justice issue, because you'll see they're disproportionately located in disadvantaged and low income communities. If you were to take a look at a screening tool like EJ Screen or CES, you could easily, see the connection between, pollutions and air quality and how much harder those things are felt by low income households. These sites could be oil drilling sites, closed dry cleaners, shuttered gas stations, any site with an unknown history where there could be pollution in the ground, where nothing's happening on the property. And just to reiterate the point, as an environmental justice issue, that's why, it's all the more important to redevelop, because they offer the opportunity to build a bridge to a more sustainable, equitable future. This could be an inner city area, desperate in need of open space or parks. That's what brownfields can generate. Brownfields can become jobs or commercial spaces, opportunities for housing. Um, Again, we want to inspire you to look at the larger context of your area, what the community needs might be, and really see brownfields, as an opportunity, to meet that end use. Um, and how we might be able to create something for the future. Emphasizing this point, brownfields can help mitigate climate change, conserving open space and building climate resilient infrastructure. If we think about what would be more protective of the community, that undeveloped, in former industrial site where there might be contamination in the ground, versus, now that property's been turned into a park with trees, they've raised the floodplain, and it's providing, a great space for biodiversity within the area. Again, brownfields can provide housing. There is a housing shortage within California and many other states. Brownfields can offer that infill opportunity, without contributing as much to urban sprawl. Brownfields are a public health issue, like we mentioned with regards to the environmental justice connection. By cleaning up and dealing with the contamination, we improve the public health within that area. And, ultimately we can create jobs either in the redevelopment of brownfields themselves, or, in the end use, if we're able to put stores, factories, parks, really so many things can be better than that closed fence or that unused property, um, that people haven't been able to, turn around and bring to its new life. Okay, just wanted to give you this sort of overview of where we are in the process. Brownfield development is a journey, and it is best to plan over several years. But some of the things that we say as part of the ECRG is we want people to take a program-wide perspective. Not just think about one site at a time or one grant at a time, but really think about what are all the resources at their disposal. So our focus today is on this first stage of how we might engage the community and identify those brownfields to build the inventory. Ultimately, some of those properties might already have a phase one or phase two conducted. But if we were to go further down the environmental remediation process, if there was known contamination in the phase two, ultimately we would be designing a cleanup and trying to pursue some type of no further action or showing that the property is, ultimately fit for its end use. This last stage, I just wanted to emphasize, leveraging funds. That's what can be really exciting about brownfields, because even though, perhaps the property value is underwater, and what I mean is, maybe the contamination exceeds the property value of the current property value. It's being able to tie into these funds, leveraging money that can make these properties possible. And we'll cover just some statistics before. But brownfields do a fantastic job of leveraging, public money with private investment, to make things happen for the community. To help people understand brownfields a little bit more, here is the most common contamination within the United States on our brownfields. The size of the circle reflecting how often it's reported to US EPA. So we can see metals like lead, other metals like mercury, things like asbestos, petroleum, VOCs. And, it's important to know that these contamination have different exposure pathways. So for something like, metal and soil, we might be worried about like inhalation or, perhaps someone eating the soil. It would be a different type of exposure risk for VOCs, where again, we're thinking about, potential air impacts if we were to put a building on the property. Just I won't talk through this entire slide, but where some of these contaminations might come from. And really, it's important to understand, the history of your own community, what industry was, and that will impact the type of brownfields that you might have. But you'll see all the types of past uses that may have created brownfields within your area, such as like metal processing, mining, say a car shop. Um, yeah, just interesting to consider. And really, no brownfield is completely the same as the other. They can be very unique. Um, that's why, brownfields can at times be overwhelming, and you need to have your data well organized within the inventory to understand the types of sites at your disposal. Okay, so to reiterate our value statement, why should you build on brownfields to begin with? Obviously, we talked on the fact that they're challenging, but in an ode to why climb Everest, because they're there. Brownfields are in our cities. Oftentimes they're what's left after the greenfield opportunities for development have already been taken advantage of. And brownfields offer, the bridge, like we discussed before, to improve the neighborhood quality and the environment. And brownfields, because they're within our cities, can help avoid things like urban sprawl, because we could be looking at housing options or jobs, right within our cities versus miles away, contributing further to issues like climate change. As we discussed before, brownfields are a multidisciplinary field, and really lead well to public-private partnerships. And there are lots of public dollars available to brownfields. And by building on brownfields, you can tie into some of this money that can make cleanups possible. Every dollar invested in brownfield will return many times over. I've seen, stats like 10 times over, 20 times over in terms of, what the investment for brownfields can be for the community. And ultimately, forming a redevelopment team, and we'll talk a little bit about more of the stakeholders involved in brownfields, but forming, a diverse team will be critical for seeing the project to the finish line. And just a fun stat, that EPA found that every public dollar spent on brownfield leverages $2.50 in private investment, and every acre of brownfield saves 4.5 acres of green space. So brownfields are a good investment. Capital tends to attract capital, and brownfields can go a long way to helping transform a community for the better. Okay, look at all the stakeholders that could be involved in brownfields. And again, this can feel overwhelming. But I think this is, one of the strengths of C-Clear, is really the networking ability within these different groups. So you'll see things like the private industry, the bankers, the developers, the community groups, the nonprofits, and sometimes these groups can have, different visions in mind. But it's important to be able to build that table where we can find these win-win scenarios, come up with, development, for the future within these areas. But with this many different groups, it really speaks to the place of how do you, share, a list of what could be 20 sites or what your plans could be. You need to be able to simplify the information. And that means, understanding what you have, what are the brownfields, and being able to organize it in an actionable way. And that's what a brownfield inventory is. So getting started, we talked about brownfields being that opportunity. Early on in the journey, you're going to have to, consider whether you're going to do this work, all internally versus you might, engage a consultant, again, depending on the level of sophistication that you want to do. So we really want you to start early, thinking about why you're doing the brownfield to begin with. Thankfully, this work, developing a brownfield inventory, can be funded by a grant, so there's no reason to think you have to do it all by yourself. But it's important to at least consider that in your technical resources, where you're going to house the data and those things early on, so that you're not asking questions that you wish you had answered differently, further down the line. So we want you to ask, what are the priorities of your local community, starting with the why? Are we exploring brownfields for housing, perhaps large-scale renewable energy projects, charging stations, open space? And, we might still collect the same information, but that type of visioning can be useful in how we communicate and how we go about in just terms of timeline as well. We want to understand the larger context of the area. What are the local plans, opportunities, or other things that brownfields could be connected to. Um, and again, starting with the why, we might be doing a full area-wide portfolio of our inventory. Really trying to name every single brownfield within an area, which could be hundreds within a municipality. Or we could be doing more of a search of, brownfields of a certain size, as we, could be looking to create a solar project and do an end-use specific list, more of a targeted brownfield inventory, something to consider. To find where the brownfields might be, a great resource would be, some online databases. Oftentimes, brownfields have a regulatory history, so things like Washington, What's in My Neighborhood, or California's GeoTracker. These are great places to start. We describe some more of the state-specific resources in the inventory guide, but we want to continue to grow this. So please let us know if you have any more that you think we should add to the list. And then oftentimes, just walking the area can be a great way to identify sites, and people want to be heard. So, perhaps a nomination process with the community could make sense to allow them to let you know what brownfields are talked about or in their area. And we want to ask, what are the active community groups that maybe want to be a part of this work? And by engaging them early, they can take some ownership and be valuable partners. And we talked about some of the things like a nomination process, but also, future site visioning and looking at that inventory and taking it to the next steps of, what could some of these sites become. And, the local residents could become your biggest stakeholders and your biggest advocates with local government and really help you build momentum on this project. Brownfields can be tricky. So a couple of, strong voices in the community can go a long way, to generating that change. Okay, just quickly about some tools to help. And again, we talked that the brownfield inventory, can be as simple as a spreadsheet. So we have an example here of the community reuse property prioritization tool, which is just a spreadsheet template put on by the US EPA. But also we have an online type tool, the BIT developed by KSU, which is great to take a look at in terms of how you might inventory your types of sites. Ultimately the level of sophistication of your brownfield inventory is up to you, and maybe dependent again on your why. What's the type of information you're considering your team bandwidth as well, and not overwhelming yourself while thinking about the multi-year journey that brownfields are, and making sure that information doesn't get lost if someone wants to do something with your inventory 5 years down the line. So data management is important to consider along the way. Okay, just to talk a little bit about some of the information you might collect. Obviously, you want to know the addresses of the brownfields, the legal owner, and private public ownership is huge here. If you are collecting data, you have to be very careful about how you share it. People might not want some of this data to be public about their property. So again, you want to think about that early. And again, private ownership could be an issue for development in the line, or it could be an opportunity. It's just something to understand and have accurate information on. We want to know the size of the brownfields, and again, the size of the property may be different than the developable area. So if we can collect that early on, that could be great. Especially if we're looking at something like a charging station or alternative energy on the property. We would want to know about the property condition. Are there any amenities or things that make it particularly attractive to an outside investor? Well, share briefly a property fact sheet, which is again, what's attractive about this site? Why would someone want to do something here? Thinking about how marketing your property can go a long way in terms of getting outside interest. Okay, thank you all for listening so much. I'm going to hand it over to Norman just to make this information a little bit more real, and he's going to talk about some great work that was done over in Niagara County. Thank you, Norman.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. And as we start on this next section of the webinar here, I've got a poll question that I want to pose to all of you in the audience today. Lujane is going to kick that off, and so our poll question to you is: what is your familiarity with ArcGIS today? Some people are a little bit familiar because they work with it occasionally. Others are very familiar. Maybe they even have a specialized degree or certificate in the program and its use. And then some people may not have even heard of ArcGIS before now. And if you're one of those people, let us know, because it helps inform me as far as what and how to share the information here as we go. So as this poll is being completed, I'm going to share the screen for my part of the presentation here as well. So that's now up, and hopefully everybody can see that just fine. And on our results here, we've got about 18% of folks who say that they're not familiar, which great, you've come to the right place. We're going to talk you through a basic tour of a GIS inventory to give you a sense of what this is and how it works. For those that are somewhat familiar, welcome, because there's going to be some elements of what we do here with GIS that may be new for you. And for those that are very familiar, there might be things in here that you will be able to recognize, understand, and be able to emulate in your own practice as you develop inventories for your communities. So, okay, with that said, our focus here in trying to illustrate all those different kinds of lessons for our new people who aren't familiar or somewhat or very familiar, all of that is going to be encapsulated in this story about Niagara County. And as I go into the conversation about Niagara County, I got one more thing that I need to do beforehand. So I'm going to share the results of this poll so that everyone sees it. And as you can see, again, 18% not familiar, 45% somewhat familiar, 36% very familiar. I'm going to stop sharing that and close that out, and then talk about the people involved in this project. So, okay, we've got on our call here a very important person, a VIP. Her name is Amy Schifferly, and I'm not wanting to embarrass her or anything, but Amy is the program manager for the Niagara County Brownfields program, and her program and the work that's been done for many years in Niagara County is just truly outstanding. And we're so glad that we could be a part of this with her to help take it to another level because she's always looking to improve this program and the work that she's doing. Also on the call is the project manager for this particular project, which included the brownfield inventory and many other things, and that's Joelle Greenland. Some of you may know Joelle through work elsewhere in the C-Clear universe. Or in the broader Brownfields universe as a whole. Joelle is here representing as C-Clear as a senior Brownfields consultant as well. So they're both on the call. I want to give them some kudos. None of this could be done without them. And so let's share what we did. First, a little bit about the program itself. The Niagara County Brownfield program has been around for many, many years. And for anyone who's now starting their Brownfields journey, I would really encourage you to take a look at their website, their information, their practices, because it can be a great example of the road ahead for you. It can show you where you can take your own program over time. It doesn't happen overnight. And certainly in the case of Niagara County, there's a lot of responsibilities and a lot of challenges to be faced. So again, it's just a great example of an excellent program in the country today. And as such a great program with such an enormous swath of territory to cover, which you'll see in a second, and many municipalities and other communities to serve, you get a lot of challenges. One of the challenges is that they actually have a lot of inventory documents prior to now. In Niagara County and in the different municipalities within Niagara County, there have been inventories developed through the years using all the best practices that Sebastian highlighted earlier in the presentation. Some of those documents, though, when they are developed at a certain point in time, are really essentially a snapshot of that time. It can get a little bit out of date through no one's fault. That's just the nature of working with this analysis and developing it into static documents that then, are kept in files and archives as you move along. So all those inventory documents that currently exist, they can be fragmented. There can be different types of documents, different types of dates in which information was collected. There can be different information itself. The very content can be a little bit different. So with that in mind, what Niagara County really needed at this stage in their evolution as a program is a single source, a single resource for all of their inventory information for all of their brownfields. They had a significant amount of it within a GIS system, but not all. And so they really needed that single source. To make that possible, Niagara County had received an assessment grant, a brownfield assessment grant, and through an RFQ procurement process. By the way, procurement, very important. Be sure to see Joelle's webinar on procurement processes if you haven't already. But through a very well done RFQ procurement process, Niagara County selected C-Clear to work with them on this project to make this whole thing happen. To consolidate, in other words, all of that information of all their many inventory documents, some new, some old, into a single geodatabase in ArcGIS. Now, that's some technical jargon for those that are a little bit unfamiliar, but what I'm basically saying is that we're going to, through this program and through this case study, show you how now Niagara County can display information about their brownfields in a new parcel map layer. So a map that shows all the properties in their jurisdiction and that are considered to be brownfields or remediated brownfields, and all the information relevant for anyone who's looking to understand more about those. So to develop something like this is a pretty tedious and time-consuming ordeal, and it sort of takes the shape of a waterfall, if you will, like the waterfalls that everyone knows from Niagara County already. So here's a picture of Niagara Falls, and here also is a diagram of the waterfall process that we used to develop the new inventory for Niagara County. First, we take all the information at the start of the headwaters, let's say, and we then identify the most valuable information from all the data that they have, the old PDF versions of their inventories or the current GIS data that they had collected, all kinds of stuff. But we take it all, we start to review and identify what information is still the most important to retain and to improve upon. And then we create a framework for a database. Now, the database in this case is really, a phone book is a database. A phone book's pretty dated, actually. Nobody has one anymore. But a phone book has a name and it has a number, right? There's two elements in the framework for that database. Well, in a GIS, the framework can include many more variables, such as the contaminants that could be on a property, which is one of the things that Sebastian highlighted earlier, as well as, a lot of other information that we'll get into. But all the things that Sebastian talked about, of course, those are the key variables that become a framework for the database. Okay, so cascading further downward, we develop a set of entries for the database, and that's all the properties that are considered to be a brownfield or a potential brownfield. We categorize and sort them by all of those elements in the framework, which again I'll show in a little bit. And by doing so, we can start to figure out what are our priorities for all the different brownfields in this inventory. When you take stock of everything, in other words, especially through a GIS, you get a new big picture view of what your portfolio or your situation is. And even if you just have two brownfields, or even if you just have one brownfield, to have this inventory information can really help you educate the public, or in the case for Niagara County, not just educate the public, but also start to build an even stronger strategy for how you want to raise awareness for these properties or generate new information. So this is the basic process. And for those that are very familiar with GIS, we could dive into a whole lot of technical information that's a little bit more straightforward, but again, technical. But for everybody on a high level, it's this waterfall. You do one of these things at a time, rolling further and further to the finer base level of what you get as a result. So, okay. I just want to stress again that in the case for Niagara County, this is a pretty unique project, I think. We had to combine many different data resources into this new database. That included the inflow of county GIS data and municipal GIS data from all the different cities and towns, as well as the PDF reports that we had to manually review and then enter into the GIS. And that creates this new database. And in this new database, we had all kinds of great information that I think can become really a solid framework for any inventory. That included, as you can see on the screen here, latest news, meaning there could be a note in there with staff information from staff, I should say, field notes about what's going on a site on a given time. There's, of course, the information about contaminants if it's available, along with information about the assessments that have occurred or their status in being completed or perhaps just being funded. There's information about remediation, the cleanup stage, if there is one active on the site. And there's a lot more here too, but to borrow further from this aquatic set of themes, the waterfall, gives you a sense of the stages at which we proceed in developing this. And then this slide hopefully gives you the idea of the confluence, the flow of many different rivers of information into one new source. Okay, but I can't help myself from just continuing the theme. But one particular note here in this whole window is mention of what's called the challenge rating. And I want to highlight that for you a little bit more. The challenge rating is a concept here for this inventory that Joelle Greenland put together. This is her brainchild. She, again, is our senior brownfield consultant here at SeaClear, and it's a really smart idea. And the reason we were able to think about this, why I think she was able to think about this, is years of experience, of course. She's been doing this for a long time and is a bona fide expert at it, but also in looking at this information from a broader view as you can with an inventory, you start to think more strategically in the way that basically helps you conceptualize some new ideas on how to handle these projects or these sites. So, okay, the challenge rating is as follows. It's a scale of 1 to 5, where one is the least challenging type of contamination for cleanup. It's still a challenge, but it's the least challenging. Whereas a 5 is the most challenging in terms of a cleanup. So within this inventory document, Joelle developed something that I think is a bit nuanced, new, and very useful. She helped people be able to, she's helping Niagara County and the public at large be able to think about contaminants in a way where they can see that, okay, if there's petroleum on a site, the challenge rating for that is likely a 3 out of 5. So that can help you start to really get your mind around what you're going to face in the months and years ahead in dealing with that brownfield. But if there are, say, heavy metals, that's a greater challenge. Now, personally, I'm not an expert in brownfields. I'm here to do the GIS work. And so for me, this is extremely helpful. I think for the public or even for developers, this can be helpful too. And one more note about the nuances of the challenge rating. If there's asbestos on a site, of course, that's a 1, as you see on the slide here. But if there's also mercury, well, then it's a 5. So the presence of any part, it's like a pyramid here in a sense, or there's a hierarchy. If there are PCBs or mercury on a site, then automatically this site is a 5. It's the most challenging, and there could be asbestos too or petroleum, but that sort of gets beyond the point that, hey, the challenge now is quite severe for what we know as a result of this inventory and this particular type of data. I don't think that a challenge rating concept like this has been really utilized in any other inventories that I've come across in doing what work I've done here for Niagara County. So I think this is pretty novel, at least for me, and it's very useful, I think. And so we wanted to highlight this as a particular feature of many for this particular inventory. Okay, so let's take a look at the inventory, shall we? I'm going to switch to a screen that shows the actual inventory itself. So right now we are in the GIS interface. This is ArcGIS from the software company known as Esri. And on the screen here, you can see a map, and that map shows us the greater northeastern United States. Now, we're going to zoom a little bit further in here to New York State itself. And as we go, it's going to buffer and load up, and it's going to be a little bit slow here. So apologies. But I think all the bandwidth for the Zoom call is creating a little bit of slowness. But I'm going to keep zooming further into Buffalo. And now I'm going to turn on the county boundaries for Niagara County. So in the green here, you can see Niagara County itself on the shores of Lake Ontario, right at the border for the United States and Canada. And I'm going to zoom further in. And again, for those who are unfamiliar with GIS, this is a lot like a Google Maps application, but whereas Google Maps provides you the data, on this platform, you create your data. And so now I'm going to take off that Niagara County municipalities boundary that showed the whole of Niagara County itself. And we're going to zoom a little bit closer in here to Niagara Falls State Park. It's a beautiful state park. I encourage everyone to go. The falls are quite amazing. And now I'm going to turn on the actual brownfield inventory for Niagara County. So on the screen now, you're seeing a lot of dark blue shapes, polygons, rectangles. Each one of those shapes represents a property within the brownfield inventory. This is a very large county, and there's a lot of brownfield properties in this inventory, just in the view that you're seeing right here, of course. And so I'm going to zoom a little bit further in, and I'm going to show you a few more pieces of data that are very important to this map and to this inventory. First, I'm going to turn on the property boundaries. So now you can see all the different properties and their boundaries and their shapes within each city block here for the city of Niagara Falls. And then I'm going to turn on building footprints. Building footprints are a very important element for an inventory because you want to know if a brownfield has a structure on its site. Well, to find that out, especially at this scale that we're operating, these building footprints are a very valuable piece of information. So the building footprints are highlighted in the light blue, and the underlying property is highlighted in the dark blue. And right away, you're getting a wonderful big picture view of in this case, one portion of the county, and what we know are the brownfields in the inventory. Right here in this general area where you see the island within Niagara River, this is the Niagara Falls. This is the state park. It is a New York State Superfund site. So that's highlighted. Another notable destination within Niagara County is Fort Niagara on the shores of Lake Ontario. That's highlighted within the inventory. And I can just keep going on and on throughout this whole area and just give you a nice fun tour. But I want to zero in on a few particular case studies where the GIS is most helpful. So let's imagine in the town of Lockport, New York, there's a developer looking for a particular site where they want to build some small retail, and they have suddenly become interested in a site at an address that is known as 316 Willow Street in Lockport, New York. Well, by using our inventory here, I can pull up that particular record. I can zoom to that property, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit here to give you a better sense of the general surrounding area and the context. And this is on Willow Street near the Altro Park, a nice, lovely park for the neighborhood that surrounds it. And this particular site, again, is known as 316 Willow Street. So it is within the Brownfields inventory. And that's a very important thing for a developer to know. But there's a lot more the developer can and should know that now the Brownfields program can provide. So I'm going to click on a little thing here for this particular property, and it's going to pull up a pop-up menu. I'm going to zoom in a bit on this, and we're going to see a lot of great information here through this Brownfield inventory that Amy and her team can now utilize through just a few clicks of a button and share with any interested party. Again, that could be a developer, it could be a neighbor, it could be a council member, who knows? Whoever it is, if they're wanting to know more about this site, well, we can already find out that this site has the basic referral name of Peter's Dry Cleaning because in a past use, this was a dry cleaner. Now, presently, it's an undeveloped site. It's a parking lot. It's also associated with some kind of recreation use, but it also is predominantly known for being a parking lot now by the property assessor's information. Are there structures on the site though? Yes, there are. We could see that in looking at, for example, the building footprints. We can see right here that there is a structure on this site. And by the way, I can know all this even though I'm in the state of Tennessee right now. So it's pretty great to be able to see this and understand it firsthand. But again, you can get some of that with a Google map view, but what you don't know is, for example, that there is a delinquent tax status for this site. There is contamination that is present on this site, including PCEs and petroleum. Those two elements together give this particular site a challenge rating of a 3 out of 5 in terms of cleanup and the challenges of cleaning up that site. The site is also enrolled in the New York State Superfund program, and it has received phase 2 environmental site assessments and site investigations since 2004 and 2011. And there are some elements of remediation process that has occurred. So it is currently in a remediation stage where we are assessing the particular contaminants, and that started again in 2012 as well. There's a lot more here that I can show, that I can share for any given particular site, but this is the kind of information that any inventory can and should capture. And if it's captured in a PDF, that's great. But to also be captured in something like a GIS means every single time that Amy and her team develops a new bit of information about this property, that's another chance for 316 Willow Street that they can go into the GIS, make a couple of updates, and this is a living database then for all that information moving forward. So can there still be fragmented series of reports and issues with some data here and some data there? Yeah, that can definitely happen. But this is a terrific foundation now to avoid that fragmentation from continuing in the future. This is now, again, a living database for all the information that this program needs to get started in a conversation with any stakeholder. I want to show one more property, though, before we go. because there are so many different kinds of properties that Niagara County deals with, and perhaps that you deal with too. And so this next property is a property along River Road. This one is on the shores of the Niagara River, and you can see that there are several properties in this particular area that are a part of the inventory. And on this property, what's interesting to me is that we can see the importance of the challenge rating right away. This is for a property in the town of Wheatfield. It's 2020 River Road. This is vacant land. It has many different kinds of contaminants on site, and those contaminants together combine to give this property a challenge rating of a 5 out of 5. It's had a lot of things happen over the years from 2006 and 13 and 2020. And well, if I am a council member who's just been elected in the town of Wheatfield, I would want to know if this is in my district, all this kind of information. This goes back, what, almost 20 years in some cases, the work that the program has done on this site. And so here we go in the inventory. All that information is right here available to tell the story about this particular site and its importance for that council member, for a potential community resident who might be moving to the area. There's so much here that can be useful for many different things that the program may want to share. So um, that's the tour in a nutshell. This shows hopefully the power of what these inventories can provide, especially through a platform like GIS. And now I'm going to switch back here and draw some conclusions with you. So here's a map. This is a map that kind of can be used in many ways to showcase a lot of important information on a big picture view. And to summarize again the benefits of ArcGIS for an inventory, I've got a few takeaways. First, like Sebastian said earlier, it's very important that you can understand all the ways that you want to use the data. The Niagara County Brownfields program is an advanced, highly accomplished, highly successful program. They know what to do with that data, and so that really shapes what the inventory can be, and of course the GIS portion too. If you're having a little trouble though thinking about how to use this data, consider the frequently asked questions that you receive about brownfields or that you yourself have asked. An inventory can be a great resource for providing those answers repeatedly and consistently for anyone else who may have those questions too. Identify all the data that you think can be necessary to answer those questions, those frequently asked questions, because that's the data that can essentially form the shape of your inventory, especially in GIS. Be sure to build the document, the reference document when you can, and a GIS database. It's nice to have both. The redundancy is delightful and useful. Be sure also, as you move forward with an inventory, to think about how you want to leverage that as a resource. Niagara County has some great ideas about how they're going to continue to use this information in the future. It's very exciting. And as you build this, you can get those ideas too, and you should definitely lean into them and do your best to think about ways in which an inventory of this type can help you prioritize, strategize, showcase information, and raise awareness for all your stakeholders. And if you want to know more, if you want to see how this gets developed or how this can apply to you, especially the GIS portion, but really for any aspect of an inventory, remember that CClear is here to help. So we can help you transition to a digital database in ArcGIS. We can help you figure out how to build the data that can fit your strategies for reuse. We can provide you a foundation for best practices for any and all parts of what we're sharing here today. And so the first step is to scan this QR code if you're interested to know more. This QR code takes you to a link in Calendly, the app that helps to schedule and connect us for a future discussion at another time. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sebastian and I'll stop sharing. And thanks for taking the tour with me. We're very happy to share the great work that Niagara County is doing.
Awesome. Thanks, Norm. That was really good. Just give me 1 second to switch over our screen. I'll try to be relatively quick so that we have time for questions. Again, we really appreciate everyone joining us today. Feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll make sure we address them, even if we don't have time in the meeting. For instance, there's a really good question with regards to Superfund and brownfields, which hopefully we'll have time for. Uh, Probably not worthy. Okay, let me know when my screen is finished loading. There we go. So again, you saw really practically from Norma's example that knowing what you have empowers to act. Think about all the things that you could do once you had a brownfield inventory like that developed with GIS. You can prioritize the sites for beneficial reuse. You can look at the sites that have high, health impacts and environmental risks and think about the ways, you can alleviate some of those concerns. We're going to talk just briefly about property fact sheets and how you might market some of these sites for redevelopment. You have the information available. We have a really valuable land use planning tool, and ultimately we can make informed decisions. We know the resources at our disposal. And so often, when we see these types of grant opportunities or people that come at you, there's a limited time window. To gather all this information takes time, and you don't necessarily want to have to do that when the opportunity, comes to your plate or comes to your doorstep. Um, so again, we talked about establishing the team, developing that inventory. Now that we had that inventory, we could go further, down the individual features of a property, to do the reuse assessment and to design a reuse plan for that property. With the inventory, we can prioritize on different factors like ownership. We saw like a challenge scale. We could think about public health risk, or we could be looking at redevelopment potential in terms of which properties could develop revenue for the area. And as I just mentioned, having that inventory makes it so much easier to take advantage of grants. To do the regional planning because you have data that people can visualize and tie in to the other systems that they might be using. Once we have the inventory, we might add more local context or more local features and develop this into an investment package. And with that, there might be some properties that really stand out, that we make property profile sheets for. And again, speaking the story of why someone would care about this site. What are the amenities? Why this site makes sense to an outside developer. And again, people might have, limited attention span, so making this attention pop. So I really like this example created by the Niagara team, again, of a property so that transformation can happen on the property. We don't have too much time to talk about funding sources, but like we talked about, there are lots of great programs you can tie in to with brownfields, from the targeted brownfield assessment to, the equitable community revitalization grant, which is a program I spend a lot of time on. If you have any properties that you think make sense or you're interested in doing a brownfield inventory, please reach out. We can talk about if maybe you have a good candidate for a MARC grant, or if there are other, types of programs, a disciplinary aspect of brownfields where there could be other programs you're not aware of, that could be used to transform the property, such as the Strategic Growth Council or, some of the above examples. Okay, let's hop into questions while we have time. We really encourage people to sign up for our newsletter, but I'm going to begin with the chat. And let me know if anyone's unable to hear me. I'm sorry, having a little bit of Wi-Fi issues, but I think Richard asked a great um, easier said than done. It would be great to illustrate some successful methods. And so one recommendation I have is trying to leverage other events that are going on within the area. If there's city meetings, looking at farmers markets, a brownfield event by itself might not get a lot of attention. So just looking within the area of how you might be able to tag on, and thinking about, what are the larger issues or maybe community groups that could do some of the work for you. Maybe there are local groups concerned about climate change, or about these things that could, be a great advocate for your project. Norm, did you want to add something?
I just a side note here that you may want to turn off your video there, Sebastian, because yeah, the bandwidth is throttling your message there a little bit. I don't want people to miss it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Okay, but
But
were you
yeah,
able to hear farmers markets and engaging the local community groups?
yeah, for sure. And I think it's part of that broader idea that this inventory is one part of many facets of a program and a process here. And so, yeah, what Sebastian mentions about leveraging existing events, that can be for all kinds of things. That's just a great practice in general for you and your program moving forward. And when it comes to, say, an inventory, it may be that you develop the inventory information first in order to then, bring people into the conversation. But it's an ongoing challenge that Richard raised, and the exhausting and exciting truth is that there's never enough outreach. There's never enough ways to try to contact, and there's some best practices there. And then ultimately, it comes down to the persistence of keeping at it until, yeah, more and more people are more and more aware of what you have to share.
Well said, Norman. Trying to build those partnerships and find out, what are the networks you might be able to connect to. Um, the next question I have, and folks, feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask your question directly, and we'll try to call on you. But I think this is another a really interesting question about what are the differences, between the Superfund program and the Brownfield program. People understand they're different, but they can explain offhand. And there are some legal differences and differences within liability. So we'll follow up with a fact sheet that really explains the nuance. But I think oftentimes for the public and the community, the impacts are the same. This is a property, in need of transformation. So there are programs that a Superfund property won't be eligible for. But still, I think it makes sense to view the site within that larger lens, of the brownfield inventory and the opportunities for development. And even within, the Superfund program, they're now trying to really take sites from, closure to transformation, not just completing cleanups, but putting something new onto the property. Okay, Lucy asked, when we design a brownfield inventory, will it show if they applied for funding and didn't qualify? And I think that goes to Norm's great point of like capturing notes. If you build it to house that information, then it should. And you should be thinking early on about that program-wide view of how you capture this good information, so that things don't get lost. Valuable history doesn't get lost when people retire. Anything you want to add to that, Norman?
Oh no, that's everything exactly. You've got a story that you're telling or want to tell. And so the inventory, yeah, it needs to have technical information for a variety of audiences, but it needs to also show this record of everything that you're doing up to a certain point. And there can be a text field for that within even GIS itself that helps you, even while you have other elements that are more rigid, like drop down menus of like, all right, we're going to check this box or put this information in. But again, it's all many different kinds of information to tell the story of what you're wanting to share for that particular property, for that particular inventory, or that program. So you can be very creative with this, and I think there's some best practices to follow. But then, yeah, we can always help you think about other ways to creatively use these inventories in the ways that Sebastian just described.
Yeah. And, to Tanya's next question, she asked, can you create a map layer for cleaned up brownfield sites? Absolutely. Once you have this developed within the GIS tool, you can customize it to how you see it, right? And the different ways. Oh, go ahead, Norman.
Oh, no, no, no. Just to also make a point here too. I didn't state it in the Niagara case, but Niagara County has a separate brownfield, remediated brownfields layer. And so they have one of those, and they also wanted it consolidated into this single source. And so definitely you can do that by all means, easy to do, and it's very fun to see. And also, you can incorporate remediated versus cleaned up versus redeveloped versus assessed and have all of that in a single property inventory as well. So imagine like what Niagara County did, an instance where cleanup sites are one category of many, and to see them all, you can either have, yeah, a separate layer or within the existing layer of all your brownfield sites, you can just click a button or two buttons and then basically have all of those pop up in one color versus maybe other colors or no color and no appearance for everything that's not been cleaned up. I hope that makes sense, but yes, you can definitely do it. And Niagara County's done it both ways, and I think that they have found that having it all consolidated for their sake is really good. But absolutely can do them both.
Awesome. Thank you, Norman. We're at the end of the hour, so I know folks are signing off. Feel free to put any questions you still might have that weren't asked, or raise your hand as you end. I know I can hold on for a couple minutes. And just wanted to ask everyone to do the evaluation form, if you don't mind afterwards. We really want to hear from you if you enjoyed this, got anything out of it, and to that point, if you'd be interested in a follow-up, maybe going deeper into GIS or what you might do next once you have your brownfield inventory developed. All right, seeing no questions or seeing no hands as well, I just wanted to thank everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Take care, everybody.